Aloha kako. My name is Moses Kaoiwi, and today we are on the Macro podcast, Bridging the Gap between Military and Community. I am here with Homer Ring, Executive Director of the Pacific Fleet Submarine Museum, and we're going to discuss about the museum and Homer as the Executive Director in his career. So Homer, your career spans decades of Navy service, from commanding submarines to shaping national security strategies. So Homer, tell us about your entrance into the military.
Like everybody, there's things in our past that we're not proud of. Mine is that at one point I had quit high school and joined the Army. That was only about 6 months of my life. I was a field artilleryman. I went back to school. I put in my application from the Naval Academy and was soon, less than a year later, out of the Army and going to Annapolis, Maryland. But at the Naval Academy, I had thoughts of being a pilot. My father was a Navy pilot for about 12 years. I had an older brother who was a submariner in the Navy. But I had, like most kids of my generation, saw Top Gun too many times and thought I was going to be a pilot. I had that delusion up until my third year, until they told me to cover my right eye and read the first line, and that was not possible. And I knew at that point I was not going to be a pilot. I could be a naval flight officer like Goose, was happy to graduate, managed to work through nuclear power school in Orlando, Florida, which interestingly enough, one of the board of directors was the commanding officer of at the time. But after that, went through a year of nuclear training, whether it was classroom or what we call prototype, where you're working at a nuclear reactor on site. And that was up in New York. And went through officer school in Groton, Connecticut for 3 months. Put in my request to be on a submarine that delivered SEALs because I thought SEAL delivery stuff would be really cool. And I wanted to be in Hawaii because, like everybody else in my generation, I grew up watching Magnum PI and everything Hawaii and thought that was the coolest place to be. And I got lucky. I got assigned to the USS Charlotte as a junior officer, showed up here in 1998. And was immediately told, Charlotte's in dry dock. I need you to go on another submarine. And that was the USS Honolulu. And went on my first Western Pacific deployment and just fell in love with it. Working with a very, very intelligent, smart group of people doing things that look impossible on paper. And then you get together and work out a plan. And you get to visit some amazing places in the world. And before I knew it, almost 28 years had flown by. And I don't regret any of it. I tell people all the time, anybody can go learn to fly. All you got to do is go down and pay for courses, but nobody can go take submarine lessons. I'm glad the way it worked out. At the time, I thought it was, worst thing in the world, failing the eye test, and called my dad and explained to me, man, I'm not going to be a pilot. And his reaction was the typical Kansas farmer of, well, who cares? They have other jobs, don't they? And I'm like, well, yes. And so
Your father was a wise man.
He was a very wise man.
So explain to me, not so much to me, but the audience, because we use the term, and I learned this a while back, submariner, while others may incorrectly say submariner. Why is that?
It harkens back to, between the English Navy and the United States Navy, two navies separated by a common language. The English are submariners, and we don't like to say that because we're not sub anything. We're submariners because we're mariners. And so this was a big thing in like the 70s and 80s. I don't really remember coming up much in my time. Whenever we get together, a bunch of older veterans and stuff, that's a quick, easy way to throw a grenade into the conversation. But generally, when it comes to Americans, we're submariners, and everybody else is submariners.
So explain how you transition from career Navy submariner to executive director of this museum.
Like all well-laid plans, I thought I knew what I was going to do. As most people know for veterans, when you get about a year or two out, you start all the preparation and going to classes and learning about VA stuff and everything else. I was thinking, were we going to move to the mainland? Was I going to try and get some corporate job? And I will be perfectly honest, nothing scared me more than having to put a suit on every day and go to some office and be in that kind of environment. I was lucky enough in several roles that I performed out here that I knew some members of the board of directors. And they approached me with the idea of becoming the executive director here. And suddenly, the prospect of being able to stay in Hawaii and doing something that was close to my heart suddenly started to flourish. I wanted to be close to the waterfront, but not be that weird guy hanging out around the waterfront, even though you don't have a job anymore, kind of thing. But here we're still part of the community. We're still part of the submarine community, and so I get to be still be a small part of that, and have a reason to be hanging around and talking to the next generation of submariners. The worst planned thing was, as I said, as my career was lucky enough to be out here for the last 15, 16 years of my career, I lived right on Fort Island. And my commute to Fort Island was to work over on the base was extremely easy every day. It was two right turns, a very short commute. And as soon as I got out of the Navy, I moved to Eva Beach and took a job here. So immediately increased my commute time by like an hour. So if I would have been able to stay on Fort Island, it would probably worked out perfectly. But
What drew you to the Pacific Fleet Submarine Museum, and how has your experience shaped your vision for the museum?
after my time in the Navy, which I dearly loved, I had the privilege of being on 5 submarines, commanding one, commanding a submarine tender. And when it came time for my shore duty and time in the Navy to end, I was looking for what that next career was going to be. I'd gotten extremely lucky in order to be able to live in Hawaii for like about the last 16 years of my career. And that's not very typical for submarine officers with the number of billets available here in Hawaii. But we lived over on Fort Island. I got to raise my son here, and this opportunity came up. And just like with the submarine force, where the crew is a very small group of people that is, highly dedicated, highly trained, interested in a mission, the museum offered that same kind of feeling. It's a small team, all professionals, trying to tell the story of the submarine force in regards to its historical aspects, what it's done here in the Pacific, and then trying to be a part of this community. And once I saw how that mission was shaped and the institution that they had created over the last 40 plus years, it was a very easy decision to stay in Hawaii and join this team.
All right. So some people may not know of the museum here in Hawaii. Could you explain how the museum plays a role in the historical significance of submarines, as well as the whole Pearl Harbor and the Pacific in Hawaii?
So generally, I tell the people that shame on you. We've been here for 45 years. We never left. They should know about us. But the submarine force has been home here in Hawaii since almost the beginning of the 20th century. The first submarines that came out here was in 1914. We didn't even have the base yet. They were down in Honolulu Harbor, and they would moor near what is Aloha Tower now. We created the submarine base here in 1919. So we've been here well over 100 years. And so the submarine force is very synonymous with Pearl Harbor and with Hawaii. The submarine force loves Hawaii so much. We've named 3 submarines after the islands and its people here. We had the USS Kamehameha, the USS Honolulu, and now the USS Hawaii, which is stationed here and is one of our most advanced Virginia-class submarines. And so the museum came about with some people living here at the time, and Bowfin was scheduled to be recycled, as we say, torn up, scrapped. And they knew that its history and its connection to Pearl Harbor, because it was launched exactly 1 year to the day of the Pearl Harbor attack on December 7th, 1942. And she was later commissioned in May of 1943, left to go join the World War II fight from Australia. And so it was felt that that submarine and its connection to Pearl should be saved. They got the Navy to donate it to a group of people who form what we call the Pacific Fleet Submarine Memorial Association. And they started refurbing the boat and put it over here in late 1978. And then in 1981, they opened up for the public for the first time. And over those 45 years, over 11.5 million people have come to this museum. We're the most attended submarine museum in the world. And that story is just a representation of how dedicated people were. It was nothing but a dirt parking lot in 1979. And by 1981, they had a little ticket booth and a parking lot. By 1986, they built a small museum. And then by 2020, we did a 12,000-foot expansion. And now we have this massive facility with 3 galleries, with exhibits from before World War II to modern day submarines. We have the bowfin. We have plans for further expansions, and we've worked very hard to continue to be a part of the community. And so when people generally come here, they may remember a field trip from when they were in grade school, and they're shocked to see the transformation that the museum has become. But part of our mission every day is to make sure that we remain a good steward of this piece of property we're on and for the bowfin, and to be a part of the Honolulu and Hawaii community.
Yeah, so you mentioned 45 years, so it's a 45-year anniversary this year.
Yes, sir.
And how does it make you feel being the executive director of a museum, being this long in Hawaii, as well as specifically focusing on the submarines?
Sometimes it's easy because you get the sense that you get to stand on the shoulders of giants and take credit for all the great work that had come before you. Then it gets a little uneasy when you realize that the achievements that came before you and the expectations they have on you right now. So we're finishing up a refresh right now where we're having, almost over $4 million in new exhibits put in to help tell our story to a new generation using video gaming and some other tools, things that are helping the museum engage a new generations of guests and the tourism that comes to Hawaii. And we're looking ahead on newer, larger exhibits to help keep telling that story. But the responsibility that the museum has in our charter to not only honor the sacrifice and bravery from World War II, but to keep telling the story that the submarine force has brought is a lot of responsibility. We're called the silent service because everything we do is classified, and we don't really talk about it a lot. And for somebody who's now retired, watching the submarine force live in a world of social media is sometimes surprising because we're not so silent anymore. But for what we did in World War II and the Cold War, the missions that I was a part of, like every submariner, it's not well understood. Even our families don't really know what we do sometimes, because even when we're in port, there's always work going on. The submarine itself is classified. It's very hard to bring your families down, and it's even rare to have the opportunity to take them underway. So it's always exciting to watch veterans come through here and show their families what kind of missions they did, use the artifacts to say, I used to work on something like this, or that picture shows the sonar space that I could never take you into because it was classified. That brings a lot of satisfaction to the job and keeps you focused on the future and how the ways we can improve that experience.
Yeah, so, a lot of locals may think, hey, this is a spot maybe for tourists or just visitors to Hawaii. What would you say to some local families to let them know that, hey, the museum is also for them to bring their families down here and to see?
My first response is we are a Hawaii museum, a Hawaii institution. So not only does the entire staff who works here live here and has lived here for quite some time, but we are the Pacific Fleet Submarine Museum, and we're telling that story. And a lot of our history is so connected to Pearl Harbor. Just like the fact that we were talking earlier, when the USS Nautilus did her historic under the ice transit in 1958, she left from Pearl Harbor on her way to do that. Even though she was a boat stationed out of Connecticut, she left from Hawaii to do that mission. And so as we go through the history of the force and the history of the Pacific, the importance of the Indo-Pacific in terms of our national security and strategy, it all stems from our place here on the islands. And as far as the community is concerned, from just an historical background of what Pearl Harbor means in the story of World War II and even modern history, we're always working to tell that story and try to keep the contributions of Hawaii in focus. I mean, right behind us is a brand new shipyard exhibit, the largest employer in Hawaii. It's got the USS Hawaii in the picture in the dry dock, and that's just one example. The other part is what we try to give back to the community. And so we've gotten to the point now, I'm proud to say, that every year the museum sponsors over $100,000 in scholarships. And that can be for college, but $50,000 of that is through the Honolulu Community College program, where it's for trade schools. And we have other scholarships through the Kamehameha School program. And then every year we host students here for field trips, and we average over 6,000 students a year. And those are free. We pay for the transportation, we pay for the tickets, we pay for everything. And so we are continually trying to improve our education program. But as I said, every day is a focus of, what are we doing for the local community and how are we helping tell the story of not just the history, but of the science and the technology and the leadership, and how are we bringing in the next generation to make sure they understand that story.
That's awesome. So how does the museum support submariners today and their families?
So as we talked about, we're an institution where they can bring their family and friends and talk about their careers and use our exhibits to try to help explain that. Outside, which we may have the opportunity to see a little bit later, is we have a memorial circle, which is a memorial to the 52 submarines that were lost during World War II. And in that area, we have numerous ceremonies every year. We have retirement ceremonies, promotion ceremonies. Submariners will come here to get their dolphins, which is their warfare qualifications from their ship. And so we're a place where they can come and do their ceremonies, do their presentations. And then it's also a place where they can bring those young sailors, because we're always trying to impress upon them the history of our service. And so this is just another resource that they have here in Pearl Harbor, where they can bring those young sailors, or they can bring their families and learn about the men and women that have come before them.
Yes. Submarine warfare is very important today, as in the past. So what would you say to people who ask the question of why does the undersea history still matter?
Generally, you start off with why undersea history has always mattered. So undersea warfare, submarine warfare has shaped national security and strategic opinions and plans since World War II. The submarine was basically a scouting vehicle for battleships before World War II. And then with the battleships sitting on the bottom of Pearl Harbor, it was decided the submarine force was going to have to go out and operate independently. And before we knew it, the war was over, and we had decimated over 50% of the merchant marine fleet with only a few percent of the Navy. And so the submarine became a formidable weapon. And then with nuclear power and nuclear weapons throughout the Cold War, suddenly we had a true submarine with almost unlimited endurance and power. And with ballistic missiles, now we had submarines at sea that could guarantee counterstrike if we were attacked first. And so the mutually assured destruction, the nuclear triad, all that stemmed from the capabilities of our submarine program. And even though a submarine hadn't fired a torpedo in anger until this year, with the Iranian frigate that was sunk just a few months ago, submarines have been conducting intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance all over the globe. But our strategic alliances always relied on what we could do against the Soviet Union, and then Russia, and then with China. And those stories and what we did generally isn't that well understood. And so we try to demystify some of that here at the museum.
Yeah. So Pearl Harbor is one of the most recognized places in the world. And for those of us who live here, it's also, home, community. What responsibility do you see comes with preserving that history?
Part of it is just telling the story, and then making sure that the kids who come through here understand, that history is connected to people. And, I watched it with, my son, and I'm sure the generations today are no different. But, history, it doesn't get a lot of attention in school. And, there's a lot of things to cover these days. Not everything can get all its attention. But I noticed in my son's history class in high school, World War II got one day. And so we work with the teachers to understand what's in their curriculum, what are the state requirements, so that they would come here. We can expand on what they learned briefly in the classroom. And, that what happened here in Pearl Harbor not only shaped World War II, but then also came to be about what did World War II mean for us, and how did the world get shaped by those experiences. And when you start explaining to the kids how the maps they're looking at today are a direct result of what happened during World War II, and then the fact that our involvement was right here, it helps that history become a little bit more real for them. And then when you start talking about the science and technology of submarines, talking about nuclear power, using our exhibits to explain to third and fourth graders it would tell you straight off they have no idea how nuclear power works. And then after a minute of discussing it with them and showing them an animated picture of how all that works, suddenly they understand nuclear power. And if we can influence some of those to go into science and engineering, then all so much better. The other aspect of that is, by no way is this museum ever trying to recruit somebody to be in the Navy. That is the last thing we're worried about. All we're trying to do is inspire the kids to be a little more curious when it comes to the history around them. And then, sometimes explaining science and technology in the classroom has its limits. So here we have several exhibits and floor space exhibited to show how that technology works, give them real world examples of how science was used to solve a problem and use to build a machine that can now go around the globe and accomplish numerous missions, basically manned by kids that are not much older than they are. I try to remind them, Hawaii's got anywhere from 15 to 20 submarines, depending on the year. And for majority of the crew, the average age is about 21. Most of these kids do not go to college, but they've gone through Navy training and they understand all the science and technology needed to operate either sonar systems, communication systems, nuclear propulsion. And they're doing that every day, just a few hundred yards from here. Mm-hmm. And so when you give them those examples, hopefully we can inspire a little bit to realize, maybe their dreams aren't that far-fetched. Maybe understanding it is a little bit easier for them. And then they just start dreaming about what they want to do. And hopefully we put those dreams a little closer.
So technology has significantly increased since World War II. And today the submarines are quite vastly different than, when the submarine fleet started. So what kind of things you see in the future for submariners and how does that look way beyond 45 years from now for you?
So basically this year we celebrated the 126th anniversary of the submarine force being created. And we are constantly reminded that for one thing that can't be changed is the way we operate. And so as we were talking earlier, every submariner has to go through the same qualification program that we started, over 100 years ago. Yes, the science has changed, the technology, the equipment has changed, but we still have the basic belief that you need to know every system on board. You need to be able to do several different jobs. You need to be able to rely upon in an emergency and operate emergency equipment no matter where you are in a submarine, because when bad things happen underwater, there's nobody who's going to come help you. Every submariner has to be able to pick up a fire hose or a fire extinguisher and fight a fire. Every submariner needs to be able to how to isolate a compartment in case we have flooding or any type of casualty situation. And so that pressure, that reliability, being able to count on the person next to you, that's how we developed into the world's most premier submarine force today. And we can't get away from that. As the technology changes, it's just going to be a matter of the equipment that we're operating. I think we're not going to see a whole lot of changes immediately, but right now we're building submarines at the cost of about $2 billion a piece. Mm-hmm. And these are huge capital ships, and they are very capable, and they're the best in the world. But just like we see with the aviation community using unmanned aerial vehicles, I think we're going to see the same type, where we're still going to need manned submarines in the battle space. But I think more of those missions such as intelligence, mine hunting, maybe even tracking and attacking other submarines or ships, more and more of that is going to go to lower cost, disposable type vehicles where we don't have to put men and women in danger. But the submarine being on station, that's still going to be a thing. There's always been the joke of, when bad things happen, the first question the president asks is, where are the aircraft carriers? Well, he has to ask that question because nobody knows where they're at. But he doesn't ask where the submarine, because the reason he knows something's going on is we already had a submarine there taking the pictures, sucking up all the electronic signals and telling them that there is a problem. Mm-hmm. So nobody ever asks, where's the nearest submarine? We're already there. And that won't change the needs for our Department of War, Department of Defense, however you want to call it, that need's not going to go away anytime soon.
So, what do you tell a high school graduate who's really interested in becoming a submariner?
I tell them that they picked the right job. Nobody wants to be a drone pilot anymore. But if you want to go into the submarine force, there's a myriad of jobs that are available to you. I always encourage them to not burn any bridges. Going to college is always a great opportunity. The Navy can help pay for that. If you don't want to go to college, we've got scholarships that can pay for that. But if you want to be an officer or enlisted guy, you're going to face the same challenges and the same responsibilities. But if you're somebody who likes working with your hands, we've got machinist mates, we've got torpedomen. If you're really interested in science and technology, sonar and fire controlmen, nuclear operators, chemists. We have all of those things operating in the submarine force. And so I tell them that there's a myriad of opportunities out there, but there's always civilian equivalents too. So if they come and talk to us directly about being in the Navy, of course, we're going to help them out and give them the resources. But we also make sure that they're keeping their aperture wide open and really just focusing on what is it you want to do with your life? What are you trying to learn? What do you think you would enjoy? And then provide them all the paths that they could achieve that in.
All right. So for someone who has never visited the museum, what is the one thing you would want them to walk away with?
That we are trying to preserve history so that you can understand the people who made it. And when we bring people in here and talk about World War II, we don't like to talk about it in an abstract manner or the geopolitical applications of what happened in battle. We talk about the people who manned the submarines and the ones who made the ultimate sacrifices and the ones who felt that they were just lucky to come home, and how that impacted the home front, how that impacted their neighbors and their friends. And then as history went on with the conclusion of World War II, how men and women continued to raise their hand and swear an oath to the Constitution, put on a uniform, and join one of the most technically demanding jobs out there. And that's operating a submarine globally at any point in history where the challenges were constantly changing on them. And if we can do that, if we can inform a generation, inspire the next generation, and keep doing it in a manner so that when we're here for another 45 years, then we'll be happy at the end of the day.
Any other comments you want to leave with the audience?
That we are open every day of the year with the exception of Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. We are constantly trying to improve what we can do for our guest experience. And that if you haven't come down here, then it's just a matter of time until you should.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you.